I believe our poop can save the world. If that makes you feel uncomfortable, or you think it's a little bit too risque for a TED Talk, you're certainly not alone. To publicly discuss our bowel movements is one of the greatest taboos that exists within our society. In my experience, there's not many people who like talking about poop as much as I do. Perhaps maybe gastroenterologists or 5-year-old boys, but it's a subject the rest of us don't really want to explore. And yet it's one of the most basic functions of the body and something that everyone in this room and anyone that has ever lived does. Speaking of which, when I was a 5-year-old boy, my absolute favorite book was Everyone Poops. Might have been yours too. It's a literary masterpiece. But as we grow up, it becomes less and less accepted to embrace our bowel movements as something to be proud of. And I believe our collective discomfort with openly and publicly discussing poop, much like religion or sex, is potentially causing a massive problem. And we're not addressing the canary in the coal mine when it comes to our personal health and the health of our planet. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to make pooping great again. I became deeply fascinated by the connection between what we eat, the health of our bodies, and the health of our planet after developing a strong fascination with nutrition and physiology during my time at the University of Colorado. This led me down a path of self-experimentation and eventually the adoption of a plant-based diet and lifestyle. I've come to realize that as individuals, we hold a tremendous amount of power when we sit down to eat 3 times a day, and our actions ripple out to a global level. In grad school, I studied the effects of fiber on our gut, and one late night, while trying to make sense of all of this, I had an epiphany, the kind of eureka moment that science often produces. Taking enormously epic dumps could save the world. Let me explain. Objectively speaking, the quality and frequency of our defecation is a remarkable measure of our health, and unfortunately, our nation's health is failing. Having low quality and infrequent poops is linked to a higher risk of many digestive and chronic diseases. What's the primary culprit here? Fiber, or rather, the lack of it. When the word fiber is mentioned, most people's minds quickly jump to one of 2 things: prunes or their grandpa's Metamucil. Fiber desperately needs a rebranding campaign because it's the most underrated nutrient of all time, and in 2018, it's still forbidden to talk about how much our poop impacts our health. I'm standing up here today to convince you that we need to change that. Most of us have probably heard about fiber and might know that it passes through our digestive tract and helps us poop. And in many ways, that's correct, but the rest of the story is actually much more awesome, and there are direct mechanistic reasons for why it protects us from disease. Fiber is a special type of indigestible carbohydrate that's found only in plant foods. What good is something to us if we can't even digest it? Turns out that something else entirely is digesting, or more accurately, fermenting those carbohydrates, the bacteria that inhabit our gut. According to emerging science on this topic, the process of bacteria digesting the fiber we get from food may very well be the key to the health of our gut, and thus the health and resilience of our body as a whole. More on that in a bit, but the reality is we're grossly deficient in both respect for and consumption of fiber, and our poop taboo is causing us to not take this relationship seriously. We write off fiber and gut health as something to laugh about, yet 1/3 of Americans suffer from constipation and widespread digestive ailments. What if it didn't have to be this way? What if every time we go to the bathroom, it's an amazing, effortless, perhaps even blissful experience? I promise you, it can be this way, and it should be this way, but in order to break this taboo, we must first see why it's worth breaking. Less than 3% of Americans reach the minimum recommended intake of fiber, around 30 grams a day. However, we may actually need around double that to optimally cut disease risk and promote daily dumps. What does this look like? Plant foods like whole, fresh fruits and vegetables contain around 4 grams of fiber per serving on average. So eating around 7 servings of these foods every day will help you reach that minimum target. For some context, a recent report by the American Institute of Cancer Research found that 9 out of 10 Americans don't eat the minimums for fruits, vegetables, beans, and whole grains. That means that basically 90+% of this room is potentially deficient in plants and probably aren't pooping enough. And ironically, we spend most of our free time concerned about eating enough protein, a macronutrient that by all objective measures, we are over-consuming in Western society, without paying any attention to our glaring fiber deficiency. which has real consequences for our health and our planet. And there's a reason for this. Protein is just straight up sexier than discussing the nutrient that makes us fart and poop. However, fiber is one of the most valuable components of our food, and our digestive system is obviously one of the most important and critical parts of our physiology. For 99% of our evolutionary history, our colons were exposed to an extraordinary amount of fiber as we foraged for food, on average around 100 grams a day or more, which shaped our modern-day digestive physiology. Today, we barely reach 15 grams a day. It should come as no surprise then that our guts and our health are suffering. When we eat more fiber, we drastically reduce our risk of some of the most common and dreaded diseases like cancer and diabetes, obesity, hypertension, stroke, the list goes on. But this is a short talk, so I want to highlight how fiber impacts our #1 killer, heart disease. A landmark meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal found a 9% lower risk of heart disease for every 7 grams of fiber we add to our day. That means every time you add a scoop of beans and brown rice to your burrito at Chipotle, boom, you just dropped your risk of the #1 killer of men and women in this country by nearly 10%. So here's what they found, the results. As our fiber intake increases, our risk of heart disease decreases. Here's where they found the lowest risk of heart disease, around 60 grams of fiber a day. Where do 97% of us fall? Here, around 15 grams a day. What if we could keep going and hit 70 or 80 grams of fiber a day, which is not uncommon on a plant-based diet? We have more control and power over our health than we think. And I know these kind of stats get lost in the fray, but they're built on mountains of peer-reviewed science, spanning nearly a century of research by our most prestigious institutions, and at the very least, should capture our attention. But how does this all work? This brings us back to gut bacteria. When we eat, our food is broken down in various processes, and we absorb the nutrients our body needs, primarily in the small intestine, and dispose of the waste we don't need in the large intestine, also known as the colon. Our entire body, and especially our colon, is populated with an estimated 39 trillion bacterial cells, collectively known as the microbiome. This forgotten organ acts as our second brain, hidden away in our gut and playing a role in everything from food cravings and mood to immune system function, disease prevention and cholesterol management, and yes, of course, epic dumps. Also, 60% of the mass of our stool is made of bacteria. That's a fun fact you can share on your next date. What all of this means is that the quality of our poop is a sign of the quality of our gut bacterial colony. And if we're having problems with our stool, it likely means we're having problems with our gut bacterial colony. And in order to keep our digestive and immune systems functioning well, we must keep these trillions of bacterial cells in balance, ideally with the good, health-promoting microbes outnumbering their disease-causing counterparts, which depends mostly on what we eat and how we live. This is where fiber comes into play. Fiber from plants is the food the good guys like to eat. And when they ferment it, our immune cells function properly. We take away the fiber and replace it with animal fats and processed junk food, suddenly our immune cells become dysfunctional and overreactive, potentially attacking friendly tissues like the lining of our colon. This process causes inflammation, and when left unchecked for long enough, can lead to a whole host of problems, including inflammatory bowel disorders and an increased risk for many of the chronic diseases I mentioned earlier. Of course, fiber also bulks up our poop to help prevent things like constipation and diverticulitis by acting like a broom in our digestive tract. For example, one study looked at the weight of the poop in 20 different populations across 12 countries and found a strong relationship between our poop size and fiber intake. And as the weight of our poop goes up, our risk of colon cancer goes down. More fiber equals bigger dumps, which equals a significantly lower risk of developing the second leading cause of cancer death in this country. Since we know fiber comes from one source, that is plants, and we've clearly established that we aren't eating enough fiber as Americans, what does that really mean? It means we suck at eating plants. Imagine what the world would look like if we weren't terrible at this seemingly simple concept and actually ate enough fiber. By adding more plants to our plates, we can reach the fiber levels that keep us and our microbiome flourishing, the way we're supposed to be. And no, Metamucil doesn't count. The evidence shows the most benefit when we get intact fiber from real food, kind of like this, or this, even this. We're talking amazing, delicious, and beautiful food, people, not just raw kale and tofu salad or prunes. If you're having amazing experiences on the John, ideally 2 to 3 times a day, that means your digestive system is working well, which probably means your microbiome is thriving. That means you're eating a ton of fiber, or rather a ton of plants. And here's where I get super excited, because we can take all of this a step further. If you're eating mostly plants, you may be drastically reducing your carbon footprint and impact on our environment. According to a 2006 report by the Food and Agricultural Association of the United Nations, it requires significantly less water, energy, and land use to eat fiber-rich plants instead of fiber-absent beef, chicken, and pork. It may be way sexier to reduce your carbon impact by driving a Tesla to Whole Foods, but it's likely not as impactful as what you choose to buy there. The same UN report and other studies since then have shown that animal agriculture accounts for nearly 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's more than every car, plane, train, and boat on Earth combined. If that doesn't make you nervous enough to poop, I don't know what will. Fiber not only benefits nearly every aspect of our own personal health, it also plays a part in reducing our nation's reliance on the destructive and antiquated and inhumane practice of modern-day animal agriculture. It's time for fiber to get a makeover. We need to start an epic dumps revolution. The importance of pooping extends far beyond a simple and often uncomfortable part of our daily routine. It's a reflection of our health and the way we live our lives. And I desperately want everyone to change your perspective on fiber and gain a newfound reverence for your morning bowel movement, so we may finally flush this taboo down the toilet once and for all. While I obviously haven't quite outgrown poop jokes, I'm dead serious about improving the health of our planet, the animals we share it with, and our own well-being. Poop can, in fact, save the world. So please, this is my challenge for you. Go eat some plants and take epic dumps. Thank you.